Well, thank you very much, Senator Johnson, for those very nice comments, and also for pointing out something that I think it's important for Georgians and for everyone who's looking at our view about what's happening in Eastern Europe to know, and that is that there is very strong bipartisan agreement for how to move forward. So I think that's an important message from today's hearing. We will now hear from our witnesses, and I'm going to introduce both of you, and then we'll ask you to go in the order in which I introduce you. First, we'll start with the Honorable George Kent. Mr. Kent has served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs since September of 2018. In this capacity, he oversees policy toward Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and, of course, most important for this hearing, Georgia. Previously, he was Deputy Chief of Mission in Kiev, Ukraine, and he also served as the Senior Anti-Corruption Coordinator in the State Department's European Bureau. Since joining the Foreign Service in 1992, he has served in numerous countries, including Poland, Uzbekistan, and Thailand. Given this background, he clearly has extensive knowledge about Europe, and we look forward to his testimony today. Also appearing with Mr. Kent is Deputy Assistant Secretary Kara McDonald. Ms. McDonald has served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor since July of 2020. In this capacity, she oversees the Bureau's work on Europe, South and Central Asia, and the multilateral and global affairs teams. Prior to her current position, she served as U.S. Consul General, Strasbourg, and Deputy Permanent Representative to the Council of Europe. From 2015 to 2017, she was Director of Policy Planning and Coordination in the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs Bureau, and she previously served as Deputy Chief of Mission in Moldova. She has also worked around the world, including Haiti and Romania. Ms. McDonald, we are also excited to hear from you about democracy in Georgia. So, Mr. Kent, would you begin? Thank you very much, Senator Risch. We will now have a round of questions. We have 7-minute rounds, and as I said earlier, I think we will be interrupted at some point for another vote, but hopefully that will go fast. I want to begin with you, Mr. Kent, and I'm not going to use your full title just because for either of you because it's long. So, as you're looking at this current crisis, how can it be resolved? What needs to happen in order to get through the current impasse?
Thank you, Senator, and Senator Risch. I think we would all associate ourselves with your comments as well. I think what is needed to get through this impasse is for the party leaders to come back together and do what is necessary for Georgian democracy to move forward. The conversations over recent weeks that the U.S. and the EU have been facilitating, and now people are using the word mediating, have centered around the necessity of electoral reforms, of judicial reforms, of how the parliament will be conducted, particularly using European models where committee chairs are shared among parties. And then I think where it comes down to the areas of disagreement is what to do about several opposition leaders who are currently detained, as well as the way forward politically with elections. And this is so critically important for the future of Georgia, as you all have eloquently said. And we are there supporting, cajoling, advising, pushing, but the leaders of the parties have to reach agreement for the sake of the country.
And you mentioned the opposition leader, Melia's arrest. Did Georgian authorities need to arrest him, and how helpful would it be to resolve his arrest to let him out in terms of getting the opposition party to come to the table, the UNM?
Madam Chairwoman, the previous Prime Minister saw the peril in making the precipitous move to arrest the leader of the opposition, and that's why he resigned on principle. And I think many people hoped that would be a shock to the political culture, and unfortunately, his fears were realized the next week. Mr. Melia did break the terms of his previous release. He took off his electronic bracelet, And so I think this gets into this issue of the full embrace of democratic norms and the rule of law by all Georgian leaders. And so this is why I think no one is blameless in the situation, but all Georgians should have a vested interest in finding a path forward, as they did last year in an agreement March 8th, which allowed elections to go forward on revised terms that all agreed. And that's basically agreeing on the rules of the game and sticking to them.
And Ms. McDonald, you pointed out that the OSCE made a number of recommendations for election reform. Can you go through what those recommendations are and to what extent they've been part of any mediation discussions?
Sure. Thank you, Chairwoman Shaheen, for the question. So the OSCE ODIHR report, as you noted, listed a number of serious shortcomings. They were focused around the allegations of voter pressure and voter intimidation. The second basket, if I could call it that, of issues was around the composition of the electoral commissions at the central, district, and precinct levels, and a blurring of the lines between the state and ruling party roles in administration of elections. So again, getting to this question of ruling party dominance in state institutions. And the third was around, the third major basket, I would say, was around the electoral grievance process and legal remedy. So we saw from domestic monitors on the ground, there were about 3,000 that were deployed during the election. They also listed a number of these shortcomings, and in that last basket, they noted that of 1,660 complaints, that the vast majority of those were cast aside and never actually made it to the judicial consideration. So these are the areas in which ODIHR has really, which sets the gold standard, has really focused the reforms and the recommendations going forward.
So I had a chance last week to talk with, actually to Zoom with, several MPs from Georgia Dream. And one of the things they said to me was that that the members of Parliament from Georgia Dream were supportive of the recommendations around election reform, and that it was UNM and the opposition parties who were opposed. Is that your understanding, either you or Mr. Kent, of the current situation?
So the electoral reform process is, of course, part of the negotiations. And while we very much believe that it is the role of the Georgians to own that process, we also have urged that that be an inclusive process, that it be transparent, that it be facilitated, that it be that there be feedback and a feedback loop between constituents and their leaders on all sides. So that is, I think, the nugget of what ODIHR and OSCE has said is missing. We have, of course, urged the opposition parties to take up their seats. I think we've seen in polling what Georgians care about, right? It's jobs, it's salaries, right. It's unemployment, it's COVID, poverty. So to get to the business of governing and hashing out these electoral reforms.
From your answer, it sounds like you think there is not necessarily a full commitment on either side to do that. Is that an accurate assessment of my understanding of your answer?
I believe it's accurate to say that both parties need to come in good faith to the table to move forward rapidly and in an inclusive manner on the electoral reforms. Yes.
And Mr. Kent, what more can we do? Can Ambassador Degnan do? Can the United States do? Can we here, as part of this hearing, do to encourage Georgians on both sides to come to the table? And I think Senator Risch put it very well when he said that the ruling party has a special responsibility to help get people back to the table to come to an agreement.
I think you're holding this hearing today and your opening statements show the right messaging, and so I think that's very much valued. Georgians understand how critically important friends here in this town, bipartisan, in Congress, in administrations under different presidents have been to Georgia's success. And so to hear longtime friends of Georgia give that very direct message as friends is critically important. I realize COVID has prevented all of us from traveling over the past year. We are getting to the point where both people in Washington and our embassies are starting to be vaccinated. And perhaps by the time we get to the Memorial Day recess, it'll be possible for travel again. And certainly, as you noted, some Georgians have started traveling here as of last week. So I think the clear, consistent messaging and making clear that while we support a successful Georgia, we also expect Georgia's leaders to do what their country needs them to do.
Well, thank you. Let's hope the current impasse is resolved before Memorial Day. Senator Johnson.